I know most of us know Laura George, but for a few people that don't, I just want to say that this is Laura George, who has co-organized this conference with me here at Radford, along with our larger committee. And she is the executive director of the Oracle Institute, which is in Independence, Virginia, not an hour and a half drive from here, right on the New River. And she is building a peace pentagon, almost done. A beautiful, wonderful peace pentagon. The pentagon, as you know, is a symbol of peace and harmony and unity, and it's the alternative to another pentagon that you may have heard about that is at the other end of the state, right? And so I want to say, please welcome Laura George. She's our guest speaker.
Thank you, Glenn. Yes, I am very happy to be here. A little nervous to be the first speaker. My partner's holding the cool for us down, though. But we are pleased to be making the first presentation tonight because we want you to understand why it's been hard to date to manifest the new world which we seek. That's what this presentation is about. It's about getting an understanding of the reality on the ground. There are two kinds of people in the world. Those who divide people into two kinds of people and those who do not. I'm starting my part of the presentation with this quote by Robert Benchley because for the next 30 minutes we are going to be breaking the world up into categories or means. And while some of you might find this structure either divisive or an oversimplification, it will help us execute the mission of building the new world if we're able to understand what's going on. Why are there such radical differences in people and their worldviews? Put another way, a dog is a dog is a dog, right? I mean, there are some species that are a little more protective or aggressive or loyal than others, but we can pretty much lump dogs together as a species. Not so with humans. So here's another way to analyze the world. Maybe there are three types of people. Maybe there are people who predominantly live in the past. I know people like that. There are also people who live in the now, almost exclusively. And then there are people who live in the future. This conference is for the people who live in the future, the people who came here with a mission to help build a new world. But then again, maybe there are two kinds of people. We call some dogs good dogs. We call some dogs bad dogs. Here we see Dr. Laura on the left. She was big about a decade ago. I don't know if you guys remember Dr. Laura. And with her on Team Light is our keynote speaker, Barbara Marx Hubbard. And in case you did not know this, Barbara Marx Hubbard ran for Vice President of the United States in 1984. Also on Team Light, we've got the Peace Pentagon. So there's Team Dark. We've got Dr. Evil and the Vice President Dick Cheney and the War Pentagon. But does it make sense to break the world up into these two categories? No, not really. It's not going to get us very far. Instead, tonight we're going to focus on the spectrum of consciousness, a model that will help us understand why people do what they do and how they think. And then after we learn about the spectrum of consciousness, my partner, Cliff Kaiser, will show us even more specifically, while it's not going to help us if we view the world in a polarized fashion. Turn my page. So to ramp up to the spectrum of consciousness, I've got Maslow's hierarchy of needs here, which most of us probably studied in high school or college. And Maslow described the lower tiers of the pyramid as deficiency needs, so named because if we don't get these needs met, we fail to thrive, we fail to self-actualize. I also want to mention that our keynote speaker was befriended and worked with Abraham Maslow for many years. Moving forward, we're going to quickly talk about some of the giants in the area of consciousness. The first one I'm going to mention is Dr. Clare Graves. And in the 1950s, he was a psychology professor at Union College in Schenectady, New York. he taught an introductory psychology class, and his students would often ask him which therapies work best on people who suffer from a mental illness or an emotional crisis. Prompted by these questions, Dr. Graves decided to do a study because he knew that actually none of the therapies developed by the mid-20th century were working for all patients. So he decided to ask his students how they would define a mentally healthy adult. And privately, he expected that they would base their answer on their own belief system, and that's exactly what happened. In the second stage of the study, he asked a team of his peers, his academic peers, to look at the students' answers and see if any patterns were emerging. And there were patterns emerging. There were two basic categories. Some of the students felt that a healthy adult would sacrifice self, and some of the students thought that a healthy adult expressed self. And then there were subcategories. Under sacrifice self, there were some who would do that for a reward later, and some who thought a healthy person would do that for acceptance now. And the same thing with express self. There was a breakdown. Some of them would express themselves at the expense of others, while others would not do that. In the third stage of the experiment, Dr. Graves separated the students into groups again, and he watched as he discussed their views in group to see if peer influence would change their minds. Similarly, he called some of his peers in to talk again about what a healthy adult meant, to see if peer or if authoritarian pressure would change their minds. Interestingly enough, one group was susceptible to peer pressure or peer influence. A second group changed their minds once they heard from the experts, but a third group held fast to their definition despite all evidence to the contrary. And eventually, Dr. Graves was able to map 8 memes. Don Beck was one of Dr. Graves' students, and Don Beck took this research to a new level. And he's the one who introduced the word meme, and he color-coded the system. He and his partner, Chris Cohen, published a book called Spiral Dynamics. And in this book, the authors described the differences between what they were seeing first-tier memes and second-tier memes. First-tier memes are similar to Abraham Maslow's deficiency needs. These are substance-level drives. Each aligns, though, with a specific worldview, rejecting the worldview of the prior meme. Also, each of the first-tier memes seeks to preserve its own status quo, and they do not recognize the strengths of the other memes. But at second tier, this changes. It's a great leap in perspective, because at second tier, the people and the cultures that are at this stage recognize and affirm a responsibility for facilitating the health of the entire spectrum. Now I'm going to briefly mention my personal hero, Ken Wilber, who's been dubbed the Einstein of consciousness. He developed integral theory, which is beyond the scope of this presentation, but it's sort of a 3D view of the spectrum, whereas spiral dynamics is, we could consider maybe a two-dimensional view. And what Wilber does is he breaks down different views. What is the person himself thinking and feeling? That's the interior view. How does the culture view how that person's acting and behaving? That's another view. So we've got 4 altogether, which, if you're interested, I highly encourage you to read Ken Wilber. But now let's go and move into the spectrum of consciousness. This is a chart that I developed and that we use at the Oracle Institute when we're teaching this. And it's very helpful if you can not become offended by it, as some people do. Simply stated, the spectrum encompasses the vast variety of interior belief systems expressed by humans, both individually and collectively. So it can be used to chart not just a person's growth, but also a culture's growth. And it can be used to the current era that we're living in today. So most importantly for our purposes, it's going to help us understand why it's been hard to date to build a new world. Take a look at the column on your left. Do you see how it goes from I, we? There's a reason for that we're going to get into, but I want you to keep that in mind. At the bottom row are some subcategories which also have to do with what happens at each of these tiers. And I just want to say the cognition and physiology column is what we might consider a perfect life, because some people never make it past level 3, level 4, level 5. And bear in mind that the experts don't believe in leapfrogging. In other words, you're going to go through these stages at some point in your life. Now, an evolved soul might pass through them very quickly. Like the Dalai Lama might have pushed a friend once when he was 5 and felt immediate shame and never expressed that sort of aggression again. But the experts say we do pass through all of these. There's no leapfrogging. Let's see. I also wanted to mention the last 2 columns. Now, this chart is for the U.S. If you look at the percent of the U.S. population, the second to the right column, that is a pretty good estimation of where people are, although the recent Pew report is showing movement, which we're going to get into. But look at the U.S. power percentage. Even though certain memes may not have the same representation in terms of the population, they're controlling what happens in this country in terms of its governance. Lastly, before we get into each meme, the experts also say that to vertically move up this chart takes incredible dissonance. In other words, something or someone must challenge us in a very difficult way, a serious way, for us to question our interior belief system or to question our culture's belief system. And lastly, under pressure, the first tier memes will regress. So we can see that, we're going to get into this in a minute, but cultures can, under stress, and people under stress, will backslide in the first tier, whereas if you make it past the tipping point and enter the second tier, you will not regress. So let's quickly look at the first 2 memes, which really don't exist other than in childhood. We're at level 1 because we're operating on impulse. It's all about me, it's an I me, but that's because there's no recognition yet of an external world. It's just all about immediate gratification at that stage. Now, level 2 is an interesting stage. This is the stage that humanity, all of us, were at roughly 40,000 years ago. And at this stage, a person is now aware of danger and seeks a stable environment. And he has a beehive mentality with his clan, and they're usually all blood related. Older members are respected for knowing the history of the clan and the basis for the rituals, and loyalty is prized above all else. But as a result of his inability to distinguish himself, his tribe, and his world, a person at this level sees spirit in everything. So their spiritual worldview could be described as animism. Tradition and magical thinking are the hallmarks of this stage, with authority given to the elders who are practiced in the arts of both survival and superstition. Tension is very rare in a level 2 community, so long as it remains isolated. However, dissonance creeps in if outsiders visit, or if a younger member starts to question the authority of the elders or wants to introduce a new or innovative idea. Then this insight can cause a lot of trouble, and groupthink then ceases. At that point, watch out, because this is a person who's willing to now test himself and his world, and he's about to move into level 3. Level 3 is where things get really interesting, because there is a segment of the population of the world that's operating at this level. It's the first fully conscious I meme, and Dr. Graves called it the egocentric existence, because a person at this stage feels himself as truly separate from his fellow man, as opposed to the level 2. As a result, this meme can be pretty harsh. But it also can be viewed in a positive light because of its characteristic heroism. For instance, we all take pride in our accomplishments, particularly if we're doing something that requires bravery. But a person at this level tends to sow his wild oats and test his power at the expense of others. In fact, it's a very Machiavellian meme, since it's based on might makes right. So historically, think of the Roman Empire through the Western European feudal times. This was the era of warrior kings, men of power built empires and reduced the masses to slaves and serfs. Additionally, this is when the aristocracies developed and the medieval caste systems, where some humans were the haves and some were the have-nots. And that's going to sound a little familiar to you. Spiritually, people who operate at this level believe in mythology. A mythology that's propagated by the ruling class, who are view themselves as semi-divine or predestined rulers, like the Egyptian pharaohs and the Roman Caesars. Consequently, the religions created during this era were mostly polytheistic, pantheons of gods and goddesses with human emotions and foibles. Now today, most of us pass through this stage by the time we hit puberty. And as adults, most of us punish our kids if they dawdle in this stage and are being bullies. So this meme is pretty rare in the U.S., but in Africa and in the Middle East, there are dictators who are reigning. In 1970, Dr. Graves had a major concern about this meme because we had entered the nuclear age. He says, in the power ethic, the more daring and horrendous the act of man, the more it is revered. It does not matter within the power ethic whether a man has plans for replacement of the system which he attacks. The heroic thing is to attack the system, and if there is nothing present to be attacked, then, if he is truly a hero, he will create a dragon to be destroyed. For even if he should die in the course of his attack, he is assured that he will live and live on in the words of men. This is a perfect description of ISIS and the mess that we've created in the Middle East. Arguably, before invasion, the Middle East was a level 4 culture, which we're going to talk about next. But because of our intervention, some of them have regressed to this level 3 power meme. So clearly this is not how we spread democracy and move up the spectrum. I switched too early. Hold on a second. So now let's talk about level 4. Dr. Graves discovered that the level 3s were the most closed until they start to contemplate their own mortality. So think of the epics, the Iliad and the Odyssey by Homer. And these legends, our heroes survive and surpass every adventure that the gods throw at them. And then our hero is finally ready to face the inevitable, his own death. So at this point, a person ponders the life-death life cycle of the earth plane, and his attention starts to turn toward the ethereal plane. He seeks salvation, to put it simply, and he will sacrifice or subdue his more base desires now in order to obtain a reward later. Graves called this level the saintly existence because it's a belief system premised on some version of a heavenly afterlife. Dr. Graves dated the emergence of this meme, not surprisingly, to about 2500 BC. This is the advent of the Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Dr. Graves argued that it was primarily the level 3 losers, in other words, the have-nots, who fueled this level 4 belief system. After living under the capricious and abusive rule of the landed gentry, the common folk experienced a type of spiritual awakening. The masses simply had to make sense of their miserable lives, and these religions offered the promise of justice in an afterworld. Here's Dr. Graves again. This saintly form of existence comes from experience that living in this world is not made for ultimate pleasure. Here he perceives that certain rules are prescribed by each class of men, and that these rules describe the proper way each class is to behave. The rules are the price men must pay for a more lasting life, for the peace which he seeks, which will come later. So in sum, the hallmark of the level 4 meme is personal sacrifice based on a preordained set of rules. In place of a human ruler, the level 4 person is now submitting to a heavenly king, who also requires sacrifice, but who at least promises a reward in exchange for dedicated service. Moreover, in the case of the Abrahamic religions, the level 4 person bows down to rabbis, priests, and imams, who are regarded as God's representatives on earth. There is a strict and usually patriarchal hierarchy to this existence, with black and white rules to make it easy for a level 4 person to know right from wrong. Failing that, there's a judgmental deity who will keep track of your actions and who decides whether you're ultimately worthy of punishment or the long-awaited reward. Another characteristic of this meme, and the reason I'm talking about at length is because we've got a lot of level 4s on the planet, it's exceedingly ethnocentric. This means that they divide the world into us and them. And if you're not in the right us group, you're SOL. And strict obedience and adherence to structure is what's prized at this meme. So I wanted to mention that just in the last month, Pew's reporting that this meme is staying pretty static. And some of the memes are moving. We're going to get into that. But this meme is not really moving in the United States. And I also want to mention that they love to run for office. So not as... Oh, I did it a little fast. I have one more point I want to make. Also, they're not as warlike as the level 3s, but Dr. Gray said that they were the most dangerous meme because they will kill on command. They will kill to protect their turf, their way of life, their religion. Also, this isn't just about religious fundamentalism. The military-industrial complex is a level 4 organization based on rules and structure. So by now you're probably wondering what kind of dissonance propels someone out of level 4. And it's really interesting. The rules are starting to get annoying now. The emerging level 5 is beginning to wonder if he's following man-made rules instead of God's rules. And once these thoughts start to creep in, his yearning for freedom and pleasure now starts to override this unproven promise of an afterlife. And something else happens. God goes green. So now we're at level 5, which is the most populated meme in the United States. And I don't really need to say that much about level 5 because we all know the materialistic culture that this nation has spawned. It is another I meme that focuses on self again, but not to the exclusion of what we learned earlier. So life at level 5 is not as cutthroat as at level 3, but it is a contact sport. So to the victor goes the spoils. And that's why Dr. Graves did call this the materialistic existence. And there's a new golden rule now. He who has the gold makes the rules. I just want to add, though, that they usually do like to play by the rules. They'd rather win honestly than cheat. So this is someone who typically loves the game of life and is acquiring the rewards for doing so. So he does play the game of life to prove to himself that he can, basically. And if he's successful in the Wall Street sense of the word, he's on top of the world. He's the master of his own destiny. And he may still go to church, but usually it's because he's networking. Because these people tend to have a rational and a scientific worldview. And so to the extent that they believe in God, they believe in a loving God who says it's okay to get rich. Very different than the God of the New Testament, or what Jesus said. So think Bill Gates, Oprah Winfrey, and Warren Buffett in the 1990s, all of whom have now moved to the next meme. And why do you move to the next meme, level 6? Well, because it's lonely at the top, and money doesn't buy happiness, and you can't take it with you. And at some point, you begin to ponder again what your obligation is to your fellow man. Oh, wait, I've got to do fast again. Wait, I got to do 6. Okay. So, Dr. Graves called this level the sociocentric existence. Wilbur calls it the first world-centric meme, because it is the first meme that starts to expand this notion of family. In other words, the starving child in India now starts to become my child. And suddenly universal health care makes sense, despite the fact I have to pay higher taxes. And as Rodney King exclaimed, can't we all just simply get along? So this is a pluralistic meme that's based on egalitarianism, but to a fault. And what do I mean to a fault? Well, the level 6 perspective isn't seeing the complexity of the spiral yet. Remember, we haven't hit second tier. And that's why the tipping point is after that. And I'm going to let Ken Wilber explain what's going on here. Now, you yourself might indeed have evolved from egocentric to ethnocentric to world-centric perspectives. And so you will easily understand that all individuals are to be accorded equal consideration and equal opportunity, regardless of race, sex, or creed. But this stance of universal pluralism that you are now expressing is multicultural and post-conventional, there's a problem. Most individuals that you treat with universal coverage do not share your universalism. They are still egocentric or ethnocentric to the core. So you are extending universal consideration to individuals who absolutely do not extend the same courtesy to you. So there's a little bit of naivete to the level 6 human, and they often create a bubble existence for themselves, thinking that everything's just sort of going to work out. So these are the folks who stop reading the newspaper because it draws negative energy. They assert that the opposite of love is fear, which is actually their shadow side coming out. And these are the people who will raise their hand and ask the Dalai Lama how close they are to reaching enlightenment. In short, Wilbur calls it the ego's last stand, because it convinces us that we're so close to perfection that we either don't need to work on ourselves much anymore, or the opposite is true. I'm just going to work on myself. So today, this meme is represented not by hippies, but by the millennials and by New Agers, who at first blush can easily be confused with second-tier humans. And why is that? Because they know the second-tier vocabulary, and they do express a world-centric perspective. However, while they talk the talk, they rarely actually help us build the new world in a meaningful way. And I'm going to show this clip from a comedian who I discovered, who's going to show us. I'm going to try. There we go. Nope. Can't do it. Can't do technology. Sorry, guys. So it's going to come to my rescue. His name is J.P. Spears. He's great. Uh-oh, guys. Good work, sir.
No volume.
I wonder if they switch the mic to the... That? Oh, all right, let's pause it.
B.
Oh. Let's fix it.
Start it up.
Yeah, go back one. Okay.
You recorded? I'm J.P. Sears. I'm ultra spiritual. And I'm going to teach you how to be ultra spiritual today. First, what you need to understand is being ultra spiritual has nothing to do with actually being spiritual, because no one even knows what that actually is. Being ultra spiritual means you look spiritual. Let's talk about energy. You're going to want to integrate this into all of your conversations. It'll seem meaningless to other people because it is. Don't let that stop you. I love energy. I love chi. I love prana. I love life force. I love auras. I love chakras. It's all vibration. Rebel against dogmatic religious terminology by dogmatically using spiritual terminology. You'll want to keep your eyes closed extra tight on this one, so that you don't see that you're actually still subscribed to the exact same belief system that you're rebelling against. Because now you're expressing the same concepts just with new words. Jesus loves you. The universe supports you. I'll pray for you. I'll send you white light. God will provide for you. The universe is abundant. It's all about getting into heaven. It's all about getting back to oneness. Hallelujah. Om.
So you might be a New Ager if, is the purpose for this slide. But he's hinting at the really amazingly good news. And I'm going to let Dr. Graves describe this good news. The data shows that homicide as a behavior of man disappears as the transition is made into the level 6 existence. This suggests that if we could work on the problems of human existence in such a manner as to get the mass of our people beyond the level 5 existence, then we would not have to worry about homicide anymore, that this is a phenomenon that would disappear. If a person makes the transition from level 5 to level 6, he really, honestly, and deep inside himself believes that war is no solution to man's problems. And there's some other great news. The Pew report is showing that this is the fastest growing mean. What's interesting, though, is where they're picking up their points. Remember, the level 4 mean is not moving. So what's happening is that level 5s are going to level 6. And the result is a God gap, which we're going to discuss later. I think that's all the questions. I just wanted to remind you that the reason this isn't considered a second-tier meme is because they are egalitarian to a fault. And I wanted to mention Occupy. Occupy fizzled due to a lack of leadership. Leadership is a huge no-no at the level 6 meme because no one is better or smarter or more talented or more gifted or more knowledgeable than anyone else. So what you end up with is a lot of chiefs and no Indians, and that makes it pretty hard to execute a battle plan to build a new world. They also have a really hard time in hierarchical environments, like workplaces, so that's why the millennials are having a little bit of difficulty. To sum up, the level 6 talk the talk, but they're not quite walking the walk yet. And all of that changes as we go second tier, so let's talk about that. All right, so what does going second tier look like? It's a monumental achievement. And Dr. Graves explained it this way. A sudden and almost unbelievable change in human behavior takes place when the individual begins to believe that psychological health should be both expressive of self and taking care of other human beings at the same time. What I find best explains the reason Level 7 people behave so much better quantitatively and qualitatively is this. They simply are not afraid. They are not afraid of not finding food, level 1. They are not afraid that they're not going to have shelter, level 2. They are not afraid of predatory man, level 3. They are not afraid of God, level 4. They are not afraid of not having status or not making it on their own in the world, level 5. They are not afraid of social rejection. That's level 6. So the hallmark, we're going to get into a few of these. The first hallmark of a second-tier human is that fear no longer prevents them from turning their life over in service. Another hallmark is that they will not regress under pressure. And another hallmark is that you drop your judgment when you go second tier. And what do I mean by dropping judgment? Imagine, that's why I built this image, imagine the beginning of the journey. You're in awe of this huge mountain in front of you, and you climb and you climb and you climb. And you almost reach the top, but just before you do, there's this plateau where you can sit and take a rest. And you look down at all the ground you have covered. You are in awe of your achievement. You're in awe of the entire experience. And you remember yourself at each one of those stages. Remember, the first tier means are dogmatically set in what they believe, but now you're starting to see, I love animism. I do see spirits in the forest again. So you get in touch with your level 2, and on and on. Wilbur calls it transcending and including as you move up the spiral. So, for example, we also appreciate the level 4 fundamentalists. This was the great generation that fought World War II. So the net result of going second tier is that we now accept people for where they are on the spectrum. Level 7 is another I mean. It's odd, right? It's an I mean, but now it's what can I do for the world? What can I contribute? What can I do to save not just myself, but planet Earth and all her inhabitants? A person at this stage has mastered his ego. This is the meme that's motivated primarily by a sense of justice in the truest sense of the word. They're motivated by a newborn access to, though not mastery of, universal truth, and they want to share this new awareness. Thus, the second tier folks already live in a post-tipping point world, and they're doing all they can to manifest it for everyone else, even for people who can't comprehend it yet. Aldous Huxley published a book called Perennial Philosophy in 1945, and he wrote, "Knowledge is a function of being." And what he meant by that is, if you're not suited to knowing something yet, you simply don't know it yet. So it's very hard for people in the first tier to even understand second tier people. That's another interesting tidbit to tuck away. And level 7s can have a tough time because although they've achieved this heightened state of awareness, they're still living in the old world. And that's a world where roughly 95% of the population doesn't get it yet. So they can get frustrated and they can get burned out due to overexertion. Why? Because they touch the ground of being, but there's more growth yet to come. So eventually, hopefully, something amazing happens and the level 7 finds his heart space. He moves into level 8. This is so rare. Indeed, Wilbur estimates that less than 1% of the worldwide population is at this stage of existence. Remember that the level 6 comment I meant, that many of them think they're here? And why is that? Because both level 6 and level 8 are we means. And level 6 is world-centric. But it's only the level 8s who've truly come to understand unconditional love. And some level 8s are transfigured by love. They love everyone and everything. And they, like the level 7, are compelled to help humanity. Action is the hallmark of both the level 7 and the level 8. Here we're talking about people, our heroes, like Mahatma Gandhi, Desmond Tutu, Mother Teresa. These people truly modeled love and compassion, and they showed the way to the next generation. And then in exceedingly rare instances, you can get to level 9. This is where you begin to merge with the creative force. And I'm going to call that force light for tonight's purposes. Such a person can move in and out of non-duality at will. His free will is merged with the light. And now we're in the realm of the mystics, the high saints, and the avatars, people like Jesus, Teresa of Avila, Rumi, Rabia. They are transcendent, they are divine, and they're building the new world using the power of light. So this is the ultimate I stage of existence. This is the I am. To summarize, the new human is someone who has achieved a stupendous state of awareness by moving up the spiral into second-tier consciousness. These are people who are ready to build a new world. They comprehend truth, love, and light, which also happen to be the titles of our foundational trilogy at the Oracle Institute. So, how do we build a new world when less than 10% of the planet is second tier? I was fortunate enough to take an interval incubator with Ken Wilber in Colorado, and he called on me. And I asked him, what do you think will happen first? Will the level 4 meme start World War III? That's the apocalyptic battle between good and evil and all their old, now ancient holy books. Or will 10% of the planet go second tier, which is the percentage that Wilber believes will carry the day? Ken Wilber took over an hour to answer my question. He concluded by saying we have no better than a 50-50 chance. And here's why. This is Ken Wilber. Every stage of evolution eventually runs into its own inherent limitations, and these may act as triggers for the self-transcending drives. The inherent limitations create a type of turmoil, even chaos, and the system either breaks down or escapes the chaos by evolving to a higher degree of order, so-called order out of chaos. And how we handle this, how we collectively handle this, will determine whether a new and more adequate worldview emerges to diffuse these problems, or whether we are buried in our wastes. So, not only do we presently possess an insufficient number of humans who understand what the new world will look like, we are also in a race against time. Time is of the essence, because of what I referenced earlier, this ever-widening God gap. Worldwide, the fundamentalist meme is probably at 40%. The pluralistic meme, level 6, while it is the fastest growing, is picking up its percentage points from the level 5s. So there is a void. Our goal is to assist as many people as possible to continue to ascend the spiral. Enter my partner, Cliff Kaiser. Cliff is a master of polarity theory, and this is a model which helps humans either ascend the spectrum or, at a minimum, transform vicious cycles into virtuous cycles. But before I turn the presentation over to Cliff, it's important for me to add 2 more tidbits. First, intelligence is not a strong factor in moving people up the spiral. As it turns out, IQ simply is not a major factor, either in how we perceive the world or how quickly we progress through the successive stages. And this usually surprises people because it's sort of human nature to think, I'm smarter than a guy who, believes something in a meme I've passed through. But to prove this point, can you distinguish any measurable difference in the intelligence quotient of these well-known meme representatives? Vladimir Putin, level 3. John McCain, level 4. Dick Cheney, level 5. Oprah Winfrey, level 6. Barack Obama, level 7. Nelson Mandela, level 8. And secondly, realize that the level 5s are laughing all the way to the bank when they successfully pit the level 4 fundamentalists against the level 6 pluralists. They keep the level 4 and 6 memes at each other's throats, when in truth, level 4 and level 6 have a lot in common, and Cliff is going to show you that shortly, how much they have in common. Consequently, if we could ever galvanize these two memes and get them to see that they have a common enemy, so to speak, we truly could start a revolution, and we might just be able to build the new world.